A few years ago, a paper riled up not just the academic community but the whole world. And in that article, a Chinese scientist had claimed that the first official designer baby were planted to their mother's uterus and were waiting to be born. This scientist had used genetic modification to make two embryos immune against the HIV virus, and as a result, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and most of his colleagues faced repercussions from the Chinese court as well. Why do you think this caused so much outrage? Was it justified? Let's talk about it. Have you seen the movie Gattaca? This film tells the story of genetically inferior protagonist who adopts the identity of a superior one and tries to overcome society's inequalities, which are based on prejudices rooted in genetic determinism. The plot starts to get grimmer when you start to see how it can apply to our real world. We already know that our genetic code holds a lot of information about us. Inherited disease, genetic predisposition, drug responses, behavioral characteristics, and much more can be identified if you know where to look in your 6 billion letter DNA. Even if regulations allowed it, we might even be able to determine how well our children will perform on their college applications before they are born. Needless to say, when it comes to genetics, ethics committees always carry a big tread lightly warning to ensure that some doors remain closed for good. One of the fields that always attracts a lot of attention is genetic engineering. This phrase, particularly when applied to humans, has long been a subject of heated debate, ethical dilemmas, and speculative fiction. The idea of altering the very building blocks of life sparks both excitement and fear. Excitement over the potential to cure devastating genetic disease, and fear over the possibility of creating a world divided by genetic privilege. The case of the Chinese scientists who edited embryos using this technology raised urgent questions, and with the rise of relatively cheap and quick means of genetic modification such as CRISPR, we absolutely need to talk about the limits of scientific intervention. But first, let's talk about some fundamental genetics. Genetic engineering has the potential to revolutionize medicine, but not all forms of gene modification are created equal. In gene therapy, there are two major types of genetic modifications: somatic gene modification and germline gene modification. While both involve altering DNA, they differ significantly in their impact, ethical concern, and level of acceptance in scientific community. Somatic gene modification refers to genetic changes made in non-reproductive cells of an individual. These modifications do not get passed on to future generations, meaning they only affect the person receiving the treatment. The goal of somatic gene therapy is typically to cure or manage genetic disorders, offering hope for people suffering from conditions that have no other treatment options. One of the most famous examples of somatic gene therapy in action is the treatment of severe combined immunodeficiency, or SCID, commonly known as bubble boy syndrome. SCID is a life-threatening disorder where the immune system does not function properly due to a genetic mutation. Scientists have successfully used gene therapy to insert a functional version of the defective gene into a patient's bone marrow cells, enabling them to produce a working immune system. Another breakthrough in somatic gene therapy involves sickle cell disease, a painful and debilitating blood disorder. In recent years, CRISPR-based gene editing has been used to correct the defective hemoglobin gene in a patient's bone marrow cells, allowing them to produce normal red blood cells and relieving symptoms. Since somatic modification only impact the individual being treated, they are considered relatively safe and ethical. They offer life-changing treatment without the risk of permanently altering the human gene pool. This is why regulatory bodies have been more willing to approve somatic gene therapy trials and treatments. In contrast, germline gene modification involves altering the DNA in reproductive cells, sperm, eggs, or embryos. Unlike somatic modification, these genetic changes are heritable, meaning they will be passed down to future generations. This raises profound ethical, social, and biological concerns. But why shouldn't we use these technologies to eradicate disease altogether? Why even stop there? Why shouldn't we be able to give our offspring a better chance at life? Higher IQ, better muscular structure, or even making them more attractive? I mean, really, why not? We're already kind of doing it. More than 90% of pregnancies identified with Down syndrome are terminated. Are we saying that these individuals are less deserving of life? Or are we simply selecting a better gene pool for our species? The answer to those questions mostly revolves around major philosophical discussion that we are not going to cover it in this video. But we are going to talk about something that we do know. For example, one major concern with germline modification is unintended genetic consequences. Our understanding of genetics is still incomplete, and modifying one gene could have unpredictable effects on other genes, leading to unforeseen health problems. Unlike somatic therapies, where errors only affect the treated individual, mistakes in germline editing would be inherited by all future generations, potentially causing irreversible harm to the human species. Another concern is the potential for designer babies, a scenario where genetic engineering is used not for medical necessity, but to enhance non-essential traits like intelligence, athletic ability, or physical appearance. In this context, the technology would be exploited to create genetically modified individuals who are perceived as superior in certain desirable characteristics. This shift toward choosing traits based on personal or social preferences rather than addressing health-related issues could lead to a fundamental redefinition of what it means to be human. Rather than focusing on curing genetic disease, genetic modification could be tailored to meet arbitrary standards of beauty, success, or capability. If germline editing becomes widely available, it could result in the creation of a eugenic society where the wealthy elite have access to genetic enhancement, furthering the divide between the genetically privileged and the rest of the population. Those who can afford such modification may secure significant advantages for their children, perpetuating cycles of inequality across generations. This prospect raises deep ethical and philosophical questions about fairness, equality, and value of human diversity. What happens to the concept of merit and individuality when certain traits are engineered to fit a narrow standard of perfection? At its core, this issue challenges the very notion of genetic diversity and how we define human worth in an increasingly engineered world. So to put it all together, while genetic engineering offers exciting possibilities for curing disease and improving human health, it also raises serious ethical concerns. Somatic gene therapy, which affects only the individual, is widely accepted. But germline gene modification with the potential to create designer baby and alter future generations carries risks of unintended consequences and social inequality. As science advances, it's crucial that we balance progress with careful considerations of its long-term effects on humanity. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support by subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. We also love to hear your thoughts on this topic, so make sure to drop a comment. And like always, keep exploring the wonders of science and take care.